Hello, welcome to week 5. If you're watching this, it means that you were absent for maybe both, but maybe one of our our synchronous days, Zoom calls. So this is what we will be covering this week in our live Zoom calls. So it's week 5, October 12th through 16th. This is our agenda for the week. We have Poetry Google Slides Part 3, which is what you're viewing, and you're going to submit those back to me because we have a lot of written work we're going to be doing in them. And then we have a check-in post, which instead of giving you something additional that focuses on poetry and new content, I just want to kind of check in with you and see how you're doing because it is the middle of this first term, which is really crazy. We're like right in the middle of the 9 weeks. So I just want to know what's going on. And then lastly, don't forget that our poetry part 2 of the Google Slides and our figurative language scavenger hunt, those due dates are coming soon. So if you have not finished those or submitted those, please make sure you're aware of those due dates. And then I want to take a second to respond here to your My View on Poetry posts. I truly enjoyed getting to read them. It was really great to hear all the insight and to see the differences in perspectives. I want to just touch on 3 points that I think are really important because they were pretty common throughout all of our responses. One is that a lot of you said, I don't like poetry because I'm not good at it. And I understand how it's easy to think that, but I just want to remind you that our second point, becoming a writer, a better writer, or just writing poetry in general takes time. Remember, we talked about the growth mindset in week 1. Everyone has to start somewhere. Brandon Leake, the really amazing poet, writer, performer that we watched, for his AGT audition, he had to start somewhere and he wrote something amazing. And this is what he does for a living. So I know a lot of you have that view on yourself that you're just not good at poetry and that's why you don't like it. But just remember to keep that growth mindset keep it in mind because you might not be good at it yet, but that doesn't mean you can't. And again, on that, a lot of you said, I'm not very good at poetry, but I'm willing to learn and to get better. And I really appreciate that. I just want to vocalize that and communicate that to you because I really appreciate that, having that attitude and that perspective, and it's important, and I think it'll help us in the rest of this unit. So, loved that. Okay, time to review. We covered a lot these last 2 weeks in our poetry unit, and I want to give us some time to go over some of the key points that we discussed and learned. So, these are our unit overview questions. What is poetry? Why is it awesome? What types of poetry exist? What are the elements and devices used? We really focused on that question last week. And then this is what we're going to focus on this week. How does understanding poetic devices help me analyze poetry and interpret meaning? So, in your copy of these slides, I want you to again tell me, what is poetry? Your response should, I would hope, be a little bit different than what you told me during week 2 because we've learned a lot. So I want you to tell me, how would you define poetry? What is it? What details can you provide? So go ahead and pause this video and write your response and then come back. Awesome. Okay, another response I need from you. Why is poetry awesome? We've just defined again what it is. Now I want you to tell me, why is it awesome? Think about all these examples that I've given you, different authors that we've looked at, examples. Tell me, why is poetry so cool? Go ahead and pause your video and write your response and then come back. All right, this is not a written response for you, but I just want to go over this again. These are the 3 key components, the fundamentals of poetry that we've been going over. We've looked at different devices like the format with stanzas and rhythm and alliteration, for example. We've covered figurative language, and we looked at just briefly some types of poetry and seeing how diverse it is. And remember, we talked about this metaphor of a sports game, that Every team has a goal to win the game, no matter what sport you're playing. And the only way for that to truly happen is if you have referees, if you have scoreboards, if you have rules, if you have boundary lines painted on the court or on the field. You have to have those things in order to kind of narrow the focus for the objective to be met. And now we have Kahoot. I'm not going to do this with you in this video, but you're going to click on this link. It's underlined, so you're going to click on it and you're going to go through the Kahoot game. It's 9 questions, and this is going to help you review your figurative language. So go ahead and pause this video and play that Kahoot game, and then we will keep going. Okay, it's time for the Big Six. This is a graphic organizer, framework, mindset, whatever you want to call it. This is going to help you look at poetry, to read it, and to not get overwhelmed. It's going to help you make sense of what the author's trying to say, because it's going to narrow our focus on 6 different elements to help us analyze and interpret meaning. So what we're going to do when we're using it, because we're going to be using it for the rest of this unit, we are going to read our poem twice. We're going to read it just to read it and familiarize ourselves with it. And then we're going to read it again after we have chosen a specific area in the circle of the Big Six to focus on. And then we're going to answer those questions underneath that category until we feel like we have a comfortable understanding of the poem. So here's our organizer again. This is obviously a picture that's in your slides, but if you want a handout, like a PDF or an attachment, if you go under resources in our modules, you will see this as another way you can open it up and save it and have it. So this is our Big Six. We have title, speaker, paraphrase, tools, turns, and theme. And today we're going to focus on just 3 of them. So we're going to look at a poem by Maya Angelou. It's called Still I Rise. And just a quick little bio about her. She is an American author, actress, screenwriter, dancer, poet, and civil rights activist. You might be familiar, if you haven't read it, you've probably heard of this. It's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's a autobiography that she wrote. She is brilliant, has a lot of really great stuff, and we're going to look at this poem that she wrote. So you'll click on this link right here and go to, it'll bring you to this webpage. So I am going to read it for you, and after I've read it, we're going to look at what our focus is for today. So let's go back here. Okay, this is called Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise, up from the past that's rooted in pain I rise. I am a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise, into a daybreak that's wondrously clear I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. So that is Maya Angelou, Still I Rise. So now we're going to go back to our Google Slides. And we are going to look at this poem again. I'm going to have you read it on your own. And as you're reading it, we're going to focus on the tools being the figurative language and poetic devices we learned about last week. So I want you to pay attention and look for responses to these questions that you can write in the slides. So what poetic devices are used most frequently? So does she use a lot of metaphors? Are there a lot of similes? Do you see a lot of repetition? Things like that. What tools repeat or create a consistent image? Again, is there kind of one that stands out above the rest, and why? And then what are the most powerful metaphors? Or it doesn't even have to be metaphors. If there's not metaphors in here, what's the most powerful figurative language tool that you can see in her poem? So go ahead and read the poem again, and you are going to answer these questions. You're going to find out what figurative language and poetic devices did she use and why. And then when you're done, we'll keep going. Okay, so after tools, you don't necessarily have to read the whole poem from top to bottom again. If you need to, you absolutely should. But this time we're going to focus on title. What words or ideas appear in other places in the poem? Is it a line in the poem? Is the title a line in the poem? What does the title highlight? What does it kind of represent or talk about? So go ahead and look back over that poem and answer these questions in the slides. Okay, and then lastly, speaker. So the speaker is Maya Angelou. What is she like? What does she love, hate, fear? What is her attitude toward the subject in this poem? Again, it might be good to just kind of review, look at some of the lines that stood out to you, and you're going to answer these questions. Okay, now that you have all those answered, that is what we did for day 1 for our synchronous day. So now, day 2. Before we get back to Maya Angelou, I just want to let you know that I've talked about Jason Reynolds before and how he's brilliant and has a lot of great stuff. And he recently collaborated and created a basically spoken word. He wrote it's kind of a poem and a letter at the same time. It's called For Everyone. And recently he created a video of himself performing the poem, and it's got a lot of really great visuals with the words of the poem itself. So I have this, you can see right here, it's listed under resources in our poetry unit. So if you're very curious, I would highly encourage you watch it because it's really great. You can see him talking and you can hear from him, and it's really inspiring. So I would definitely check it out. And then lastly, I wanted to share this with you as well. Like I said, I really value your feedback and the things that you're interested in. And a lot of you in your Get to Know Me form told me that you were interested in rap as your favorite genre of music. And I had a few of you ask me questions about how rap and poetry are similar, how they're different, like how do they connect? And so I reached out to one of your peers, Micaiah O'Connor. He is an upperclassman at our school, and he is a writer and a rapper. He writes his own stuff and he performs it. I've seen him before. And I reached out to him to ask him for insight because he is really, really talented and has a lot of good wisdom. And so I wanted to see what he had to say. So he listed for me a couple of similarities and differences between the two. So he said that both of them, both rap and poetry, are expressions of emotions and ideas in a rhythmic way. They both have different styles, meaning different genres, so it's not always just one type. But he said the differences are that poetry isn't always rhyming, but rap 99% of the time is, which is common with music. And then rap, he said, is less formatted with both style and lyrics. Many rappers often throw in lines that don't exactly contribute to the theme of the song. So he gave a really good picture of some of the overlaps of similarities that they share, and then also areas where they're different. And he said, which I might come back to this when we start to write our own poetry, might be helpful for you. He said, when I usually write my lyrics, I think about the message theme first and foremost, and then fit a flow, certain rhyme schemes, and emphasis on words, and sometimes building a story from one verse to the next that all ties to the theme. So just some really good insight on him as a writer and his process, how he writes. And lastly, this is something he said that really stuck out to me. He said, rap is being poetic in unison with music. So that kind of sums up how it's different, how it's similar, how they work together, how they're connected. So that is some thoughts from Micaiah O'Connor, your peer at West. Okay, back to Maya Angelou. So we covered tools, title, and speaker yesterday, day one. And now we're going to look at turns, paraphrase, and theme. So if you need to read through that poem again, please do so. But we're going to look at these questions and respond to them. So where are the spots that the poem turns or shifts? You might be asking, I don't know what that means, or thinking that. Basically, where in the poem do you feel that there's kind of a turn or a shift or a change in maybe the tone or the mood? Or where do you feel the rhythm kind of change? Just mark where in the poem is that. Just say where it's at. And then what is the tone in the beginning of the poem and the end? And where does that change? That's probably where you'll find your turn for this question right here. This is going to help us focus on how does the writer change their tone and the way that they're approaching the topic they're discussing. It's going to address that and give us some good insight as to what specific line or idea in the poem is very important in connection to the theme. So go ahead and do that and write your responses in the slides. And then for paraphrasing, this might take a little bit, especially if the poem's longer like Maya's is, but it's definitely going to help us when we're trying to answer the theme question, which is next. So you can do this either line by line or stanza by stanza. It kind of depends on what you feel is best. You're going to look at those and you're going to put the poem in your own words. So, for example, if I were to just do the first stanza, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. So she's saying that there are other people that are talking about her identity, who she is, in relation to like what kind of legacy she's going to leave, because she's saying you're going to write me down in history. But she's saying that no matter what they say, she is still going to rise above that. So it's just that easy. You just read a stanza by stanza, or you could even do line by line if that helps. And then you're just going to summarize it in your own words. What is she saying? And I don't want you to feel pressure about being right or wrong. I just want you to take your observations and give it your best shot, because there's nobody out there that's a poetry expert in terms of trying to interpret meaning, because writers are complex, and the messages that they have to share are not black and white. They are very layered and very complex. So don't worry about being wrong or right. Just look at it, put it in your own words based off of the observations and the connotations that you can look at. And then what big ideas or images stand out? Is there something that's repeated throughout the whole poem? Is there kind of a recurring symbol? Something like that. And then what is the story of the poem? What happens? What is she talking about? If you could sum it up in one sentence, what is this poem about? So go ahead and look at those questions, respond to them in the Google Slides, and then we will keep going. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about theme. This is the last of the big six. So what are the big universal ideas addressed in the poem? And how are they represented? Think about all of the figurative language and poetic devices that we talked about last week. What are those tools? What are those techniques that she's using to present those ideas? So go ahead and respond. Okay, that is it for our big six. So I want to show you, remember, once you are done with your written responses in these slides, you're going to submit them back to me. I want to show you really quickly the check-in, just so I can emphasize again what it is. So I just want to know how you're doing. I want to see what areas you feel like you're growing in, what areas you still need help with. So how are you doing in general overall? In general and with school, I want you to answer that. What areas of our poetry unit specifically are still confusing for you? Is there a specific, are you still confused by metaphors or something like that. Is there something that I can help bring more clarity for or to you? And then what is an area that you feel that you've grown in, that you kind of feel successful now? Maybe it was an area that you previously were confused about or didn't feel great about, and now you feel like you kind of have better understanding and you're doing good in. So I just need you to answer those 3 questions and then post them, and that's it. Again, if you have any questions, just please email me. Other than that, we'll see you soon.